Welcome to Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now you can learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property. Learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau with the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denisi, and Corker. He's a member of the Committee on Professional Ethics of the Bar Association of Nassau County and counsel to the Nassau Academy of Law. And now, here is your host for Law You Should Know, attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we'll be discussing how family members can be paid caregivers under a special program under Medicaid. And to give us the details about this interesting and helpful program is Melissa Negrin-Wiener, who's a partner at Genser Kona. Genser Kona is one of the largest and most prominent elder law firms on Long Island, and she's been on this program before to talk about elder law mediation and other topics in elder law and long-term planning. Melissa, welcome back to Law You Should Know.
Thank you so much, Ken.
So tell us about what the idea of this new program is. Give us an overview of this aspect of Medicaid coverage.
Sure. The program's been around for a while, but it is getting a lot of attention now. We refer to it as CDPAP. It's the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program, and it is one of the programs under Medicaid home care, which allows your home care aide or assistant to be a family member.
And before we talk about other details, how can someone qualify, aside from qualifying for Medicaid, how can someone qualify, what needs do they have to demonstrate for home care?
Well, for home care, it's based on what your needs are and what hours Medicaid is going to pay for. So once somebody's financially eligible for Medicaid, they will do an assessment to determine how many hours of coverage Medicaid is going to give based on what the needs are. Can they dress themselves, groom themselves, use the bathroom, things like that.
So can it range from like a few hours a week to 24-hour care?
It can range usually from 4 hours a day to the largest benefit, which is a 24-hour split shift. So two 12-hour shifts where somebody's awake all the time.
And someone is there to care for the person.
Right.
And what are some examples of situations where someone might need that kind of care that Medicaid might approve of?
For someone who perhaps is coming home from the hospital and had some paralysis on one side and needs assistance getting dressed, needs assistance in the shower, needs assistance using the bathroom, things like that, to somebody who's bedbound.
And it could be somewhere in between, but they have chronic care. They're not quite bedbound, but they have, MS or some other serious illness, or Parkinson's, some other serious illness requiring someone to be with them?
Correct. It's really the need for hands-on assistance versus supervision.
Would it also include Alzheimer's?
Sure, it would.
And if a family member was going to act, if it's a family member, does it matter whether they reside in the home anyway?
It doesn't matter. So a parent could move in with a child and the child could become the caregiver.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa, right. Okay. The two people that are kind of knocked out of the box are spouse. Spouse cannot be paid as a caregiver. And also the parent of a child who's under 21.
Okay. It could be an ex-spouse.
Could be an ex-spouse, okay. Absolutely.
Or it might keep you from getting married or keep you from staying married. And I'm sorry, what was the second exception?
It's the parent of a child under the age of 21.
Okay. So if an child had problems.
Yes.
Let's say Down syndrome, they might be able to qualify as a caretaker.
Depending on, they qualify as a caretaker. They also have to, the person who needs the care has to qualify for Medicaid because it's a Medicaid home care program.
Okay. And does the caregiver have to demonstrate any particular ability?
Not necessarily. So the reason why this program is so important is when somebody's covered under Medicaid and they have an aid through an agency that Medicaid is paying, there are certain things that the aid is not allowed to do. One of those things, for example, is to administer an insulin shot. There are, there's a small list of things that the home health aid that's being paid for by Medicaid can't do. But if
Go ahead.
it's a family caregiver, they're able to provide those services.
And let's say you have the aid. Would someone at a higher level of qualification come to do that?
Not usually. So you would need more of a nurse type situation. And so my example of insulin is that can be 3, 4, 5 times a day, depending on how much the person needs. And that's not something that the program will cover.
So this caregiver could learn how to do that and administer that as part of their duties.
Right.
And do they have to provide all the care that this person needs, or could they work part of the time and then part of the time a professional aide would be there, let's say, for the bathing part, or if there was some physical or just intensive work that they didn't feel comfortable doing?
Yeah, the family member can actually hire other people to, cover some periods of time.
Okay. And could they do it? Could two family members split the work?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And do you need a third-party agency, a Medicaid agency, to be involved that handles CDPAP?
You do, because the person who's caregiving, who's getting paid, needs to get paid through an agency. So it's almost just kind of there as a means of getting the Medicaid program to pay to get the money to the caregiver.
And so are they paying you the going rate for the aid?
It ranges depending on the family member's a certification. If they wanted to get certified, say, as an actual home health aide,
okay,
they would be on the higher end. But I would say it ranges anywhere from $11 to $14 an hour.
Will that be affected by increases in the minimum wage or geographic location?
I think really both. I think both.
So technically, they, for all sense of it, they're acting as an employee of the agency?
Yes.
Okay. And has this program worked in practice? Have people been happy with it, both the people receiving the care and the people giving the care?
They really have. It's not something that we do all the time. It's something that really comes into play in situations where perhaps a child has left their job to be able to take care of mom, and so it's a way of getting some income to that child. And also when there's those needs that the home health aides through the Medicaid program cannot administer, the insulin and things like that. That's really when this comes in handy.
Or drive them to doctors.
Drive them to doctors. But one of the problems with the program, or that I've seen, is that you don't have the same backup that you have through an agency if, say, the person is ill. The agency would be required to send somebody else, but in this case, the agency wouldn't be. So you would have to have backups in place.
Okay. Could you also take a person to like a day, center where they participate, a senior center or daycare center or something, just to give them a lift there and make sure they get to where they need to go?
Sure. There are a lot of daycare programs, day programs that community Medicaid covers for people. So just sometimes when they come up with the plan of care, it will include a daycare program.
And it could even be feeding and things along that line.
Yes.
Okay. And are the caregivers generally happier, being able to help their parent and generating some income while they're doing that?
Yes. Yes.
And I think I asked you before, they could keep their present job and kind of add this to what they're doing as long as they physically spend the hours doing it?
Yeah, as long as whatever Medicaid approves for hours that the person needs to have somebody there, as long as there's somebody there for those hours.
Okay. Let's say there's a situation, is there any relatives, what degree of relative do you have to be? Can someone do it for an aunt or something, or for a cousin or some other relative?
It doesn't even have to be a relative. It can be a friend.
Who's available?
Yes.
And both parties are willing to work it out.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it would tend to be, let's say, an adult, unless the child or young adult had some kind of major condition.
Right. It would be typically a younger person taking care of a parent or older family member or friend.
Now, what are some tips if someone wants to apply and get the situation approved? What do they have to do?
Well, it's really part of the Medicaid process. So your typical tips for applying for community Medicaid, of course, is talking to an attorney and making sure that you're financially eligible, that your assets are below the threshold, and that your income is below the thresholds. And then once that piece of the application is done, that's when we reach out as elder law attorneys. That's when we reach out to the home care agency that deals with CDPAP and get the family caregiver kind of hooked up with the agency.
And is it possible that some families already have the Medicaid, or someone in the family on Medicaid, their condition deteriorates so they qualify for this service, where they then want to apply?
Sure, and somebody could be working with an agency and a Medicaid aid, and then decide that they want to switch to a family member to the CDPAP program, and they can switch over.
And they can also switch out of it?
Yes.
And have you seen that happen?
Yes.
And for what reasons does that happen?
So in some instances, perhaps if it's a child, they need to go back to work. They need to make more money than what they're making as the caregiver, or perhaps the needs have become too great. If we see a lot of times it's difficult when somebody becomes paralyzed, or they become dead weight. They can't be lifted. So at some point, the child caretaker may not be able to do that part anymore, and they might need somebody who is certified and trained to do those things.
And you recommend an attorney help set up this arrangement?
Absolutely. I think that an attorney really needs to be involved from the beginning to even just get the financial approval, because you could spend months just trying to get that done.
And if someone needs to go into, let's say, long-term care, and and under certain programs, the long-term care can be in the home as an alternative to a nursing home?
Well, people can be cared for in their home as long as they're able to be, if that's what they choose to do. Long-term care is typically what we refer to as the nursing home or institutional setting, and that's a different type of Medicaid program.
And that wouldn't qualify if you needed, let's say, a private aid or more attention. This program would not apply to that. Well,
if that person was, say, in an assisted living and they were paying privately for the assisted living, because typically Medicaid doesn't pay for assisted living, they could have somebody paid through the community Medicaid program to help if they needed some extra attention. But once somebody's in a nursing home facility and they're on the chronic care Medicaid, the long-term care Medicaid, that's going to pay for, the stay in the facility, and then all of the aides and everybody that works at the facility is all covered under that.
If they were in a long-term care facility and they were paying privately, is it likely they would qualify for Medicaid? Or if they had taken out some kind of long-term care insurance and that was paying for the facility, and they then qualified for Medicaid and got the aid this way, is that what would happen?
Well, if somebody's getting assisted living and getting long-term care insurance to pay for a nursing home, typically, I would say 99% of the time, that policy is not going to cover the full cost. So we would still be doing a Medicaid application for that person to make up the difference.
Okay, so not to cover other topics, but is it worth it having long-term care insurance? Does it increase your choices down the road and cover other situations?
So long-term care insurance is expensive and certainly worth looking into for people who can afford it. It does allow more choices when it comes to assisted living. But for home care purposes and for nursing home care purposes, that can all be paid for through the Medicaid program.
And it really just gives you income that you can use to pay for the care. It
Correct.
Doesn't pay for the care.
Right. So, So depends on the policy, but typically the policies will send a check to the individual, and then they use it to pay for the care. So, it gives you more options. And there are home care agencies, for example, that don't accept Medicaid. So you can use one of those agencies then if you're using the long-term care insurance. As far as nursing homes go, again, I haven't seen a policy that covers the full cost of a nursing home. We always need to do either Medicaid or private pay to supplement.
And Medicaid would theoretically cover the full cost of a nursing home if they accept Medicaid.
Yeah, every nursing home in New York State accepts Medicaid, and they would pay the full cost as long as the person's eligible.
And what about assisted living? Do they accept Medicaid?
There's a program called the ALP program, ALP. It's the Assisted Living Program through Medicaid. There are a handful of assisted living facilities that accept Medicaid. Amber Court, which is in Westbury and in Smithtown. There's Maple Point and Rockville Center. There's a handful of them, and they accept Medicaid as payment. But the majority of your assisted livings, like the Bristols and the Sunrises that you see all over, they do not accept Medicaid.
Okay, we're going to continue our discussion in a moment, especially focus on this last topic we've been talking about. We're talking with attorney Melissa Negrin-Wiener, and she's a partner at Genzer Kona. They're one of the leading elder law firms in New York and on Long Island, and handle all aspects of elder law and estate planning. You're listening to All You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, and also over the internet at nccradio.org. We'll be back in a moment.
This program is brought to you by Nassau Community College, which offers a paralegal studies program. Students can major in paralegal studies while earning their associate's degree, or earn a paralegal certificate if they already have a college degree. These programs can even help you start a second career as a paralegal. It's a program for anyone who wants to work in a law office assisting lawyers, the government, or a position in an insurance company. More information about full-time, part-time, days, evenings, weekends, or online courses is available by calling 516-572-7774 or by email at paralegal@ncc.edu.
Once again, we continue with Law You Should Know. From the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denise, Corker, and Sauer, here is attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome back to Law You Should Know. We're talking about Medicaid and Medicaid's home program that allows family members to be paid caregivers. And if you've missed any part of this, the podcast of this and many other episodes of Law You Should Know is available at nccradio.org. And our guest is Melissa Negrin-Wiener, and she's not only an elder law attorney, she acts also as a mediator in issues concerning elder law, and she's one of the few people that does that, and we'll explain that in a few minutes. Melissa, we've been talking about this program. You mentioned before the break that some assisted living facilities will accept Medicaid, and obviously you help people apply for and get covered by Medicaid. Just as a follow-up, why would some assisted living places accept Medicaid and accept whatever the Medicaid reimbursement rate is?
Well, through the ALP program, there are a designated number of ALP beds, we call them. So designated number of beds that can be paid for through the Medicaid program. So sometimes these facilities are entirely Medicaid, and sometimes they have just a certain number of beds that are Medicaid. So they vary from facility to facility. But the type of Medicaid that covers the assisted living is the community Medicaid. It's the same type of Medicaid that covers the home care aides.
Okay. And that's why sometimes you have a choice, depending on the person's needs. Under Medicaid doesn't require necessarily giving up their wherever they're living, and they can get the care at home.
Right.
Let's take a step back and talk about overall eligibility for Medicaid. Obviously, the timeline is key because there's a look-back period.
Right. Well, the look-back period is only for nursing home Medicaid. For home care, there is no look-back period. So whether you're at home or assisted living and you're applying for community Medicaid, there is no look-back.
And also there's some aspect of it that if a member of your family lives in your home, there's some, and maybe they receive some of your assets, that it's not held against you in the look-back period?
The look-back period for nursing home care is 5 years.
Okay.
What I think you're referring to is the caretaker child exemption.
Yes, thank you.
And that is if you have a child living with you for at least 2 years prior to your admission to a nursing home, you can transfer your home to that child. So not any other assets, but just your home to that child without any Medicaid penalty.
So you could even do that sort of the day before or immediately before your application.
Yes.
Okay. And then I guess you could theoretically continue to live in the home you have to go into a nursing home if that happens.
Not necessarily. So a lot of times people will transfer their property to a trust or to a child, and they retain a life estate, which means they have the right to live in the home as long as they're alive, keep all their tax exemptions, remain responsible for the upkeep on the home. So they can retain some interest in the property.
Okay, and that child who's now the homeowner can be paid to take care of you under this
CDPAP.
CDPAP.
Yes.
Okay. So what are some other considerations about to making sure you are eligible for Medicaid, in planning eligibility for Medicaid before the need arises?
So what we really look at first is the financial piece. So in order to qualify for Medicaid, whether it's at home or in a nursing home, a person cannot have more than $15,450 in assets. And that is not going to include retirement. So if someone has a 401k or an IRA or a 403b, they can have money in those accounts, and it won't count towards that $15,450. So really we're talking about checking, savings, non-retirement assets. If a person has more than that, then we definitely recommend some sort of planning, depending on their family situation, depending on what they have, and depending on what type of Medicaid they're looking for. That's going to vary. The planning's going to vary.
And on that, let's say they had some money in an account above the $15,000. The look-back period would be 5 years before on gifting it or giving it away?
For a nursing home, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So Medicaid would look back 5 years at all of the banking records and determine how much money the person had given away to a non-exempt individual. So in other words, if they gave it to their spouse or they gave it to a disabled child, then they wouldn't have any sort of penalty. But if they gave it to a trust or to a child, then they would be subject to a penalty.
And if there's another name on the account, if it's a joint account, is there some presumption that it's all in one person or the other?
Medicaid assumes that the entire account belongs to the Medicaid applicant. So unfortunately, we can't split those things in half.
So a person really has to do what with that money?
Well, again, it depends on the situation. We do a lot of planning with trusts, irrevocable trusts. Typically on Long Island, the house is the largest asset, so we do a lot of transfers of homes to irrevocable trusts. Start the 5-year clock when people are still healthy, and hope that we get through the 5 years without the need for a nursing home. That's a pretty typical plan.
Is the trust eligible for the same tax exemptions that a senior might be, or a owner-occupied home might be?
As long as the trust retains a life estate in the individual, so I had mentioned a life estate just earlier, there's language that can go in the trust that says that the individual has the equivalent of a life estate. And if you do that, then yes, you'd still get all those same tax exemptions.
What other considerations should the public be aware of in being eligible for Medicaid when the time comes?
One of the biggest issues with home care Medicaid is income. So Medicaid says that if you live at home and you want a home health aide to come in and take care of you, through Medicaid, you can't have more than $859 a month in income. So they're looking at your Social Security, any pension, any interest off of accounts, or any income from a trust, or any distribution from a retirement account. So most people will have more than $859 a month in income. And they get told all the time, you can't qualify, you make too much money. And that's the end of it. But what a lot of people don't know about is something called a pooled income trust. And that's a special type of trust that we set up to protect the excess income. So if somebody makes more than $859, as long as they put that excess into this pooled income trust, which is a type of special needs trust, then they can still qualify for the Medicaid and they can still have the use of that money.
Through the trust.
Right.
But they can't touch the income. Or the
Right.
income can't touch them.
Well, basically, the trustees of the trust, which are not-for-profit organizations, will pay the bills of the individual that you send to them.
Will the family get the trust back at the, will go to the family's benefit down the road?
No. So the majority of people, in my experience, do spend all of their income each month. But if it does build up and the person passes away, the money in the trust actually goes to the not-for-profit as a donation, as a charitable gift.
Okay, but not to the family.
Not to the family.
But this is only really for the income coming in. And you said people will manage to spend it, or the trust will manage to spend it.
Especially if somebody's at home and they still have to pay property taxes.
We just have a moment or two left in the program. Just tell us about your work as a mediator in elder law issues.
Sure. The work as a mediator kind of came about by doing a lot of client meetings and realizing that in these types of situations, when we're doing planning and talking about family and things like that, a lot of difficulties come up within the family. And so going to become a certified elder law mediator really helped me with my consultations, my ability to counsel people, to help them through those difficult decisions.
And explore options.
And explore options, absolutely. So it definitely helps in elder law situations when you're dealing with families.
And what are some of those issues that have to be worked out, just very briefly?
Really just, family dynamics where some children feel like people are being treated differently, or, someone's being treated better than somebody else, or who's being chosen as the power of attorney and why, and all those types of things where people get insulted or parents are afraid they're going to get insulted, and sometimes they just need to talk it out.
And it's to preserve harmony in the family in conjunction with all this planning. You want a happy family.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
I would like to thank our guest, Melissa Negrin-Wiener. She's not only an elder law attorney, she's an advanced elder law mediator, and she's a partner with the firm of Genser Kona, which has offices all over Long Island, in Nassau and Suffolk County. If you missed any part of this program, or for any other topics, go to our free podcast at nccradio.org. This is 90.3, the voice of Nassau Community College, and please join us next week at this same time for another program on Law You Should Know.